Trails Through Daybreak 2 has one major problem, in my opinion. But before we dive into that, I would like to first discuss the game more broadly. I thought about giving this game a traditional full review, but the more I thought about doing that, the sillier it felt to me. Guys, this is the 12th game in the series, and the second game in an arc. If you're even reasonably considering playing this game, you're either an indoctrinated Trails fan, like me, or you're lost. And hey, if you're lost, no shade. I love that you found your way to my channel of all places. But here's the scoop. You need to at least play Trails Through Daybreak to even consider playing this game, though I would strongly encourage you to consider the remainder of the series as well, as plot arcs raised in the second game of the series, again, this is the 12th, find development and resolution here. Still, in the service of being a good little YouTuber, I will provide a spoiler-free bulleted review of what I liked and didn't like of the game now. I did a Trails ranking list a couple weeks ago where I said this was my least favorite game in the Trails series. And if you read the title of this video, you also know that I have a strong critique of this game. Despite all of that, I love Trails. I love all Trails, and I love this game. Trails is my favorite RPG series, so being the lowest ranking in that series doesn't mean it's a bad game to me. I still enjoyed this game, and I wanted to make that clear in advance. Okay, well let's talk about what I liked about the experience here. So we will start with the pros. Falcom's new engine probably looks dated to some, but I think it looks fantastic. Character models are good and expressive, battle animations are solid and fluid, and the cityscapes are gorgeous and feel like real places to me. I love this presentation style. I wouldn't consider this to be among the better OSTs in the Trails series, but it's still Trails, and there absolutely are some bangers on offer here. Trails music to me just never misses. Same for the English dubs, to be honest. Damien Haas crushes it as Van Arkride, but the entire cast is solid. Dubs have come a long way, and they are outstanding here. The hybrid action turn-based combat system is still amazing, just like it was in Daybreak, and it's even better here with some of the added tweaks. I actually liked the hacking minigame, and it was a great way to utilize one main character who is an AI. It was fun to me and enjoyable. This game has some amazing character development moments that harken back to events that happened many games ago, and this was a real treat for us series vets. This is all despite some broad story and pacing criticisms that I'll be leveling against the game later in this video. And finally, Van Arkride is still my favorite protagonist, and it's just ever a plus for the games that he takes center stage on. Next, let's pivot to some of the things I don't like. I wasn't a very big fan of the split scenario offering we were given here. The problem is Van's sections were just palpably better than the sections that were led by his substitutes, so to me, this just brought the game down. I also was not a fan of the Marchian Garten. It felt like the true Reverie Corridor or Hermit's Garden, a sort of post-arc bring the characters together for a randomized dungeon romp that just felt entirely unwelcome for the second game in an arc. Yes, the Garten has some story significance, but that still could have been delivered without the mediocre dungeon crawling and the time waste that the Garten entailed, to say nothing of the gacha mechanics. Next, a minigame was added to several of the quests where you needed to tail suspects without getting too close or getting caught, while staying far enough away without losing them. And let me not mince words, this minigame just sucked. It was easy, and the best way to handle it was to speed up the time until the suspect was ready to turn a corner, and then just rush to that hiding spot. I rolled my eyes every single time this minigame came up. You could put a gun to my head, and I still couldn't explain to you how 7 Hearts works. Does that make me a dummy? Probably, but I won every time I needed to just by picking cards at random, so jokes on this bad minigame? Vantage Masters or even Blade were much better card games in my opinion. This game has way too many boss rushes. Mileage can vary, but I'm not a fan of boss rushes personally, and it felt like most boss encounters in this game were just that. The pacing of this game wasn't great. There felt like there was a ton of padding to me, both in the amount of boss fights and in the content more broadly. again, including the Martian Garten, and a gameplay element we will be talking in the final section of this video. The story of the overarching Trail series did not seem to advance here much at all. Finally, there's time looping. The looping part, which I'll talk more about in my post-spoiler warning section, was annoying, but considering the game mostly lets you skip redundant parts, it wasn't that bad. I mean, I never like having to play through the same sections more than once, but there's a bigger reason this mechanic is problematic to me. And I suppose with all these bulleted points out of the way, we should get to the main event. Dear viewer, at this point, I'm going to need to discuss some spoilers in Daybreak II to discuss what my biggest problem with the game is. To be fair, the mechanic I'm going to talk about is introduced in the prologue, but I still think that I should provide this warning here in advance. Additionally, I will have to talk a little bit about the Trail series more broadly, because my problem with this mechanic does tie to the series as a whole. I will still try to avoid every spoiler I can. Honestly, I don't think I'm going to be giving any major spoilers here, but I still want you to consider yourself warned. If you have not played Daybreak II, or worse, you haven't played many of the other games, you might want to consider not listening any further. Do with that information what you will. So your party has possession of these relics that are called a Genesis, or Geneses when discussing them in plural. Without getting too in the weeds, these are essentially technological McGuffins that the greatest scientist in the history of the game lore, who single-handedly ushered in a technological revolution, entrusted to his great-granddaughter, Agnes, this arc's female lead. To skip a whole lot of exposition and still be as spoiler-free as I can be, you have some of these McGuffins in your possession at the outset of Daybreak II. And what do these McGuffins do? Well, for the purposes of my criticism, they essentially reset time back every single time something really terrible happens, usually when main party members get killed. Where do you jump back to? As far as I can tell, arbitrarily plot-convenient points, where your characters don't entirely remember what happened, but remember enough to take further action to prevent the worst from happening. On its face, I already don't like this mechanic, but there's actually a big reason that it's even worse than it sounds, and I will be building up to that point now. I see three major problems with this. The first is superficial, but still probably a problem that most players notice, and that's the fact that time loops, more often than not in games and media, are just straining. They pad out the runtime, forcing you to relive the same moments of time again and again, and man, does that get painful in the third act of this game. Because I'm a crazy person, I actually bothered to tally how many times this happened in the game. I might have missed one, I might have been tired scripting for this video, but by my count, there are 21 times in this game where the McGuffin resets time and shunts your party back into the past. 21 times. Secondly, if the tedium and padding that comes along for the ride with a mechanic like this isn't bad enough, it's the sheer damage something like this does to the game tonally. Well before even the halfway mark of the game, you're conditioned by this mechanic to be numb to the stakes. Because there are no stakes. Something bad happens to your party, the McGuffin kicks in, and everything's better again, and the party gets to try something new. For me, this was excruciating. This one mechanic just made it impossible for me to buy into any bad thing that was happening on screen. Except for the first time, to be fair, because I knew that what I was watching just wouldn't stick. It couldn't stick. For a story-rich game and series like this, having a mechanic like this in play is pure anathema. It took me out of it and divested me from the story, honestly. Would you believe me then if I told you that this isn't even the biggest problem with that mechanic? The biggest problem comes to my point number 3 here. To articulate this point, I have to talk about the Trail series as a broader whole. As many in the community have pointed out before in critique of Trails, and I share this critique in full disclosure, Trails has a really hard time killing characters. And in the rare times it does, many of them, through one deus ex machina or another, come back to life in the fullness of time. Some major character deaths throughout the story stick, and wouldn't you know, those are some of the best and most impactful story beats in the series. But in the main, and I would say even the vast majority of boss fights the series over, your party is basically just scrimmaging against some variety of frenemy or even ally to test your resolve, or some highly melodramatic thing like that, and almost no one ever gets hurt. I said it before, guys, and I'll say it again here. I love Trails. You just do not get an ongoing series like this with such fleshed out world building and an ensemble cast anywhere else. But man, is everything I just explained here one trope I really wish Trails would pull off of. But this is the setting and tone we have, love it or hate it. And I mean, it's not like the series is afraid to get dark. Star Door 15, if you know, you know. And hell, for that matter, even the entirety of Daybreak 1, which, as a reminder for those who did not watch my Trails ranking video, I ranked as my second favorite in the whole series, in large part because it felt more comfortable getting darker and taking risks than its predecessors. So in comes Daybreak 2, which shares that comfort in those darker moments, only to strip them away from you and reset them pretty much without fail. But the problem runs deeper than that. What Daybreak 2 tries to sell you, in a way what it does sell you, is that the Trailsverse is an extremely dangerous and deadly place. And for all those silly scrimmages that happen in 11 previous games with villains and frenemies and allies, where virtually no one ever gets hurt and everyone dusts off and becomes pals after, I'm now to believe they're extremely deadly encounters if the party only ever made one wrong move through all of those hundreds of battles. In a series that is infamously cautious to not kill characters, Daybreak 2 kills many characters, and often, but for the fact that the McGuffin is there to stop any said deaths from sticking. What we are left with is the same result as all of the other games, a model of storytelling that rarely has the cojones to kill major characters, but a wildly different tone and setting from everything else that has been established before us. Once I saw this contradiction, I couldn't unsee it. Has the world of Zemuria always been this lethal? If so, you could have fooled me vis-a-vis the first 11 entries. And if you say, yes, Nick, duh, I will retort, well then where are the bodies? For every major character in this series who was killed and stayed dead, I can probably match you one for one with one who was killed and resurrected. This is a tonal inconsistency that bothered me once I saw it for what it is. And despite all of that, I still love this game. Yeah, I had a blast playing it, and I trust the process. I trust Falcom. I have not gotten my hands on Trails Beyond the Horizon yet, but I know the Kaseki Nut did, and he adored it, and I hold his opinion in high regard. So yeah, Daybreak 2 has some major problems, but I'm still a Trails believer, and I probably always will be. If you enjoyed this highly niche rant of an even more highly niche game, consider giving me a like and a sub. I'm a brand new YouTuber, and every single like and sub means the world to me. I love RPGs, and I plan to keep going. This is Nick BRPG. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next one.